Welcome to Grace in the Grind, where we're here to empower, to encourage, and to equip you to do all that God has called you to do. And today I have actually two friends with me, which is real fun. This is our first time we're doing basically a panel episode. I've got my friend Dave and Richard, and they're going to take a second to introduce themselves. But guys, as we go into this episode, make sure you hit the follow button and then make sure you also engage, because we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear some questions and things on this show and maybe future shows. So guys, Dave, Richard, welcome to the show today.
Thank you
Thanks
for having
so
us.
much, man. I'm so excited.
So let's do this so that the audience have an understanding of who's here today. Let's do about 90 seconds to just give us a quick intro, what do you do? Who'd like to go first?
I'm gonna let Richard go.
David is the man with the plan.
All right, David,
All right,
you're first.
I'll go. No problem. So Dave Chametzky, what I do is I help people write their stories, get their stories on stages, or create a podcast like this. You know, it's all about aligning ourselves. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's, the Grace in the Grind is really all about aligning ourselves, not only for business, but in our personal lives. So we'll talk a little bit more. And you see my little name under there, the Goon Father. I also have a charity called Goons for Good, part of my alignment of who I am and what I do. And, being on the show with you, Jim, and Richard, man, I align myself with amazing humans like yourselves.
Well, thank you, sir. Richard, let's hear from you.
My name is Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. I'm an author, podcaster, speaker, but most of all, I'm somebody that went from dope dealer to hope dealer. So for me now, I'm just trying to help people struggling in life and business, and also help people launch podcasts like mine that's hit the top 0.5% in the world, and it's all about paying it forward.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to say just a shout out to you, because I know you just hit 2.5 million downloads on your podcast, man. So just congratulations on that. I'm very excited, dude. Very excited for that.
God is good.
He is all the time. So with you guys both having, for you, Richard, it says the mental health advocate. David, you have a big background in helping people with mental health. Let's start there, because I find that mental health is a big topic that is oftentimes not talked about. So with that being said, how did you guys get into being advocates or helping people with mental health? How did you guys get into that whole theme or that whole niche that you guys are working in?
I guess I'm starting. I got in because I got thrown in the deep end. But, life got a little too much for me, and I sought out mental help. And truthfully, back in the day when I was in college, I was taking behavioral sciences. That's what I got my bachelor's degree in. People bring you through, sometimes really slowly, and then other times he's going to bring you by pushing you down the flight of stairs. And I only learn when I get pushed down the flight of stairs. And, and that's really how it came. It started building upon it. And then I started seeing where God was bringing me. And I didn't even admit that it was God, but I was like, all right, all these things align up in a way that's become so much more powerful. And you see that through line. And that's why it's so important to know what our through line is. We take the time out of our traumas, remove ourselves out of those traumas, to then have the ability to see much more clearly, right? Nobody believed Moses, at the beginning, and then at the end, they followed him. That's what we need to do as all of us, is having that ability to see, follow through our vision when others can't, and then they start going, I get it now. It's your vision, but it comes through a lot of different ways.
For me, I'm in recovery 36 years. Haven't had a drink since 1989. I'm a two-time suicide attempt survivor, so I'm 60% blind due to a training accident in the military. So I've had to come back a lot, and I figured there's more people out there like me. So why don't I just, take the bullets for them while they're getting up and trying to get healthy again. So that's what I believe, and I believe that you can't really help somebody that's in the storm unless you've been in the storm. And if you've been in the storm, you can reach down and help them up, because they know you've been there, you've done that, and you can tell. You're not just telling stories; you're actually telling war stories.
So what do you guys find that's been the hardest challenge? if for you guys who are listening, if you heard my story, my wife is diagnosed with multiple mental illnesses. I have CPTSD and a few things. And so, like, what do you find has been the most challenging in working with people with this, or actually having people open up about this? What have you been finding the most challenges?
Well,
I think it's really.
recently, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
recently it's been people in recovery because they're telling me, well, you're supposed to be anonymous. You're not supposed to tell your story. You're not supposed to be in press, radio, and film. And I'm in all of that. I figure I
Mm,
can help millions of people instead of just being in a room with 10 people. And so I'm
Mhm.
getting shit on by a lot of people that are in the recovery space. It's kind of weird. They're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be in anonymity. And I'm like, I won't tell about you. I'll tell about me, but I'm not going to tell about you. If I see you in a meeting, that stays between us. I don't. I'll never say that. But people are like, well, according to the big book, press, radio, and films, you're supposed to have anonymity. Well, I got a movie coming out, and it's all about what we're talking about. So, and a lot of people don't think you get shit on by the people that are in the recovery circles, but it happens a lot.
Yeah, and go on that, it's the stigma, right? So if Richard wants to tell his story, or anybody wants to tell their story, it's their story. Now, if Richard's telling my story, that's the confidence, and I know he wouldn't, unless I've allowed it, and that's why I share my story. And that's part of the problem we have in society. Hey Jim, you have a problem? Yeah, just don't tell anybody. Why don't you sit down? Yeah, it's nice, and that's it. No, it's the opposite. So I also, to add on to that, what happened with my story, I attempted suicide, and during my attempt, it said you have to go tell your story. It's not
mm,
your time. Go tell your story. And I didn't realize it until recently that I thought it was just about the mental wellness. I'm an author also, and as I'm writing this other book, I had a download from God, and He goes, "It's not only your story. Don't think, like almost as a joke. Don't think you're so special that it's about your story. It's the idea of curating that safe space, removing those stigmas. Because in the substance abuse I worked, I was a recovery coach. There's
mm,
horrible stigmas. When you hear about recovery, what do you see? You see the needle and the spoon. You want to know the one trick that what's horrible about that? It's dirty, right? Even in the language we use. Are you clean? No, no, we're always clean. Or maybe not. Maybe you didn't shower, but that doesn't make you not clean. A lot of the overdose deaths were not drug addicts. There were people. There were people in areas like mine, Massapequa, which was the number one overdose death area for the longest time, but it was prescription drugs. It was the opioids that they got from doctors. So let's change those stigmas. And that's why speaking about mental wellness and recovery, that's why whenever I see somebody like Richard, who's been in recovery, long-term recovery, you're still in recovery, but that's a warrior to fight through those things. That's real power. That's why
mm.
when people see somebody who might have used substances and go, wow, but they're a little weak. I'm like, nah, they're strong. Especially if they've gone through recovery, they're stronger than anybody else.
Nice, nice. So then this it brings up another topic within this is how do people deal with shame and guilt? Because the shame and guilt in the midst of the stigma is insane sometimes. So how do people
So,
deal with that?
Oh
we have
well,
you
the way I
middleman.
dealt with it was I had a lunch with Gary Vaynerchuk, and he told me to write my story, write a book. He told me
Mm,
to put all my dirty shit out there because once I put it out there, what can they say about me? It's like the movie 8 Mile. Once at the end, Eminem said everything about him. Nobody else could ever talk about him. So for me, that's what I did. I wrote a book. I told all my dirty shit. So you can't say anything I haven't said about me already. And
mm,
and I think sometimes we just have to be fearless and say, you know, I once was a drug addict, but now I have a beautiful home, a beautiful
mm,
wife, three beautiful children. I go out and I eat steak and lobster whenever I want to go out. So for me, it's kind of like, well, that's who I was. That's not who I am now. It's kind of like I love the story that you could rob my old house because I don't live there anymore. But
right.
I don't live in the shame because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be the man that I am today. So I think sometimes we have to make our mess our message,
Mm,
kind of like
nice.
David does.
Nice. So David, do you have anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to is take away that power. 2 weeks after my suicide attempt, I was called a bunch of names and it broke me. But it also made my determination that's not who I am. I mean, if you look at that person only 5 years ago, in 5 years, I've got a TEDx talk, I have a podcast, I have a number of books. Again, not about me. Well, I'm not, you want to tell my story? Here you go. Tell my story. You want to think what you think? Great. You don't know me. And if you knew me then and you haven't seen me in 5 years, you don't know me. That's the
Mm,
thing is you can do it. And what I was saying before is rear view mirror thinking. When we drive our car, we're looking at the windshield. It's much bigger. Rear view mirror thinking is really small. Hey, and it's behind you. We don't drive going backwards. We drive only going forward. And that's what
mm,
I do. I don't mind. You want to ask me questions about it? The only thing I won't talk about is how I attempted suicide. Other
right.
than that, I'll talk to you about my suicide attempt. I'll talk to you about my feelings around it. I'll talk to you about my other mental health struggles because that's how I grew and I'm comfortable with it. Now, there's still stuff I'm not comfortable with because it involves other people and I don't want to talk again. I don't want to tell anybody else's story. I can tell you from my perspective. And,
Right.
but the answer is, man, I want my story out there. That's why I love being on podcasts like yours, Richard's, because you never know who's going to hear it. And how I know that is my talk. I don't think it was a performance that I would have liked to give. And if I would give it today, it would be completely different. But where
Mm,
I'm going with that is when I did it 4 years ago, I had families that reached out to me who needed to hear that message. I'm like, how how'd they even hear it? It didn't matter. You never know where that one person is. This is a saying in some of the Jewish learnings which says, if you save one person, you have saved the world. So if I can save one person, then man, I'm good.
sweet. So then this brings up a good question because both of you guys tend to be very type A, direct, hard charging people, right? And I love the dynamics and the depth of your stories. I love it. So then my question comes, and Richard, we're going to start with you on this one. So my question then becomes, what about people who aren't type A that just can't decide? We'll just go do it because you guys are like, yeah, just do it, just go tell your story. But what about some of the other people that are more passive or more type B or I think what is C or whatever it is after who aren't direct? What would you say to those guys to help them make that transition to deal with that shame and guilt?
Well, for me, I wasn't that type A guy. And the first time I actually went to a meeting it was court ordered and I was still drunk and hungover in that meeting and I was as timid as can be. And I'm 20 years old and hanging out drinking nasty cookies and drinking stale coffee and listening to these guys and that's when I found a home. But my sponsor told me just sit down and shut up. You don't know anything and just listen, get there early, make coffee, and stay late. So for me, I was the type C or D personality. I didn't get that way until speaking a lot. Because the only way
Mm,
you're going to be a great speaker is speaking a lot. And so for
right.
me, I spoke in a lot of jails, institutions, but I was afraid to even speak up and tell my story when I got sober. I think it took me almost a year just to speak up in a meeting. So I am that type A personality and the type D personality sometimes in the same day.
Hmm. That's fascinating. I love it. So do it until it becomes natural to you. So I love how you're talking about that. David, what would you say to that?
Yeah, we always talk about my bat, right? You guys always think it's the violence. It's about bringing awesome thoughts, and really, what it is finding the balance. When I talk about baseball, it's about when you hit the baseball bat, it's finding your balance. So, like even for me, like here on a podcast, yeah, my energy is going to be a little high, but there's plenty of times when I'm by myself, trying to be really, really quiet, like no TV or just the dog and I. I ride in my car sometimes with the radio off. I've had friends get in the car and they're like, "Dude, what are you, a monk?" And I'm like, sometimes I need to be. I mean, again, when I go to conferences, yeah, when I'm out of my room, I might be higher energy. I want to use my energy differently. I know how to balance it. And I also know there's times at night when everybody's starting to get going, and I'm like, I need to just go back to my room to at least reset myself. Learning how
Mm,
to reset yourself. much like that little hand gesture I was talking about before in the green room. That's so powerful, is being able to acknowledge it. I don't know that, and maybe I'll ask Richard and yourself, prior, like when we were doing the things that were less good, I didn't always control myself. I was just like, all right, man, this is what I'm doing, blah, 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 blah. I mean, again, growing up, my nickname was Kid Ego. You know, I was that guy at times. I got my butt kicked, but I still was Kid Ego. You know, people talked about me and it hurt me. Kid Ego. It's okay. What I say, my suicide attempt, Kid Ego died. It's when you have to tell your kids, you guys are fathers, when you have to tell your kids you attempted suicide, man, there's no ego there, buddy. You know, there were teenage girls, but for me, there's no ego there. I had to learn, and now I've learned it triggers me and acknowledge it. And I just was talking to somebody about that. I go, it's beautiful in the world when you can see it moving differently. When you see the trouble and people pushing your buttons, maybe people, family, like especially around the holiday, they're pushing buttons, and you're like, yeah, all right, that's on you, man, not on me. You don't have to say those words, but if you can think that and react differently, there's a superpower.
I can go sit at a Richard Branson event and go get lost in the back row, but I can hit my music mentally and I can be on the stage at the same time. So it all depends. It all depends on the situation. Because sometimes, you know, if I go to events, I want to be the dumbest guy in the room. This way I can learn everything. I don't want to be the smartest guy in any room because
Right.
that way I'm not learning. I already know what I know, but I don't know what Jim and I don't know what Dave know. So I think sometimes it's in the military, we call it situational awareness.
Right.
So you just, you know, there's a place and a time, I think, for everything.
There is. So this brings up a good question, and we're going to start shifting gears a little bit here too, because I want to go from, you know, we started off with mental health, and because it's a huge topic, very near and dear to my heart too, and move into what you guys do respectively for, you know, the communities in the world. Do you find, and David, we'll start with you on this one. Do you find that your stories that you're talking about here is what fueled you to start your business, or was there another catalyst that started and then this just kind of merged with it?
Yeah, it definitely started that way. You know, like I said, when I was going through I got to college and got my degree in behavioral science, whatever that was worth. But I was working in the legal industry, so it was completely two different worlds. And then when I got myself into a deep situation, I went to see a mental health professional, and I learned some techniques, and it all started coming back to me, alignment. You know, again, that where God comes into it, it starts aligning you. You know, he kind of nudged me that way. I still stayed with my ear, but I was diving into assisting people with mental wellness. And, you know, I thought I was taking care of myself. And then, you know, we just know sometimes, like, I don't have to do that. I know what to do, but it doesn't help us get where we need to. And I wasn't taking care of myself, and eventually led to my suicide attempt with a lot of different stories. And that's when God took the bat to me and was like, it's time to wake up now. Stop messing up with time and stop getting distracted. Boom. And I woke up. I mean, you know, I was told I have this story, and that made me focus. And even then, in my business, I you know, talking about mental wellness, as you said earlier, is a real struggle. People don't want to hear it, or there's a few people that do, you know, are still struggling themselves. We're looking for those branches. Well, when I started writing my story, writing the stories in my books, which are not about me, I have 4 fiction books right now and a few others coming out very shortly, because during the pandemic, the worst thing that could have ever happened was I was alone. I just started doing writing. I started diving into myself, and I learned how to be comfortable with myself most of the time. And that's where my business has turned into a shift. I'm a TEDx speaker. I'm a DTM in Toastmasters. So I know how to speak. I know what to do. And then by writing, people want to get their stories out. They're afraid. And because of my mental wellness background, I can help you overcome the challenges and obstacles of writing, getting on stages, or then really taking it to that next level. And as Richard said, you're a speaker. You got to speak. Get your own podcast.
Good stuff. Richard?
Well, I'm not as smart as Mr. David. I'm a 9th grade dropout. I don't even have a GED. but I've read over 6,000 books. I got 18 books going right now, plus 2 audio books. I'm an accidental podcaster. This was never supposed to happen. I was with GNC and I would just try a new product and I'd make a podcast about it. I'd be like, yeah, this one tastes like ass, but it works great. And people started listening to it. And then when I got hurt on duty and I lost 80% of my vision, I had nothing else going for me. 18 months I sat in darkness and in silence until somebody says, hey, why don't you hit that record button again about
Mm.
what you're going through? Somebody else is going through the same thing. So that's how the whole podcast began. And I got to thank Mr. Gary Vaynerchuk. He's the one that started. He came up with the podcast, the Comeback Coach. He came up with the name. He came up with all that stuff. If it wasn't for Gary V, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But now it's just about paying it forward and helping people struggling in life or business. Because whether you're the CEO or the janitor, we're all struggling with the same stuff. It's just sometimes at different levels. So that's all I'm doing. I'm the hope dealer now. I went from dope dealing to hope dealing. So
I still love that. When you started using that tagline, man, I was like, dude, that's dope. You see what I did right there? But that was awesome, man. I was like, that's great. So,
yeah.
but I do appreciate both of y'all's stories because, what you guys are dealing with is what a lot of the listeners deal with. And the difference is you're here speaking about it with courage while a lot of people will never do that. And that's a shame because everybody's story is important. So with that being said, so what do you find? Let's talk about some of the positives. Like, what do you find in the spaces that you're in? Some of the wins, like give us like a win that you've seen. Like, man, this was awesome, and why I do what I do.
Well, for me, this week I'm building my own podcast studio in the back. I just got notified yesterday or the day before that I was ranked right below Ed Milet's podcast. And
Wow.
then a week before I was ranked right below Alex Hormozy's podcast. So sometimes I think that, and I've been on the same list as Gary Vaynerchuk, Tim Ferriss. So for me, it's kind of like the people that I look up to now I'm actually can see as kind of as a level. I mean, but then there's Joe Rogan. That's where I'm shooting for next. So I'm trying to be the GI Joe Rogan. So, for me, it's not about bragging because it's all him. I tell everybody it's all God. God's doing it all. I'm just trying to do what he tells me to do. And just like, I live in I went from living in a crack house 3 miles away from my house. My house is like almost worth like almost $700,000. I got
Mhm.
3 brand new cars and I went on 6 vacations this year, but it's not me. It's him.
Right.
And as long as I give him the glory and give him the honor, then I'm always going to be blessed and I'm always going to be highly favored.
That's awesome. David?
Yeah, no. So God, let's start off with the God, right? It all is. I used to say I grew up again in the Jewish faith, and I remember in college, kind of asked this girl out, right? And she goes, "You're not Jewish enough," and I've always heard that in my head, and so that's why until this year, I didn't really embrace my relationship with God. I was always believing that I was not worthy of God in a lot of different ways. And then this year, I was given some advice. I was in a conference and I heard, and I want everybody to think about this, is they always talk about free will. What if you gave back free will to God? What if you really trusted? Not just like, all right, I'll trust you, is the sun going to come out? Yeah, the sun's going to come out. You just might not see it because there are clouds. What if you really gave almost every decision? It's like that movie Yes Man, right? Give it to give it to God. I've done that this year. And the successes that I've had, when you ask me about success, God puts the right people in your pocket. God puts the right people in your way. Man, I got to tell you, that's why you asked me earlier, how am I doing? I go, well, any better, I'd be twins. The opportunities that are coming. And one of my wins was just recently. My friend who's 88, I know her about 8 or 9 years, and she says, Dave, I need to get my book out. I go, okay, let's do it. We started writing and working together, and she starts crying. And I go, oh, I'm sorry, we'll stop. She goes, no, you're the only person that I've ever met in 88 years that can understand my story exactly the way I want to tell it. And be able to get it out. And you allowed me that safe space to tell my story the way I want to, not the way we're going to tell it when the book comes out. And that's what it is everybody wants their story. I will tell you that most people, because I've sat with a lot of people in recovery or still using, that they want their story out. They don't want that lifestyle, but it's coming from somewhere else. Like I remember one night working with somebody, and he goes, "Dave, you're going to be upset with me." I go, "Why am I going to be upset with you? I just used." I go, "But you're sitting here in front of me, aren't you?" I go, "You were a winner today because you chose that while you still were doing less good behavior, you went to seek somebody to help you through that." And that's where you tell that story. There's the famous story about the man who's caught in a hole, and the first time they go down, they ask their friend, and their friend gives them some advice, but it really isn't anything. Just pick yourself up. You'll get out of that hole. Then you might go to religion, and religion is great, but they might just send a prayer. Well, prayers are going to hit you. God will hit you with the right message when you're ready to listen. But then you have somebody like Richard who jumps in that hole, like me, like Jim, who jumps in that hole and goes, and then you think we're both stuck. But the magic with all three of us is we know how to climb out of that hole. We know the way out because we've done it. As Richard was talking about earlier, that's why I don't like calling myself a coach. I'm a mentor. I've been through it. You got a story. I'm not trying to go story for story. Most of people's stories are going to be worse than mine, but I understand where you are. That empathy of meeting where we are, that's where the power is. And when you can meet somebody where they are, there's a lot of things. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is how can you be quiet and learn just by listening, right? In those rooms, and I've been in those rooms, you listen to the story. Part of the story is that it's taking the power away from the negative part of it, put some energy into it, and energy leads you to God. And God is all about love. Anything else is about man.
That's good stuff, both of y'all. And so let me just take a moment for you guys who are listening right now. As we start to close out this episode, make sure you follow these guys. They are both powerhouses. And in the show notes, everything's going to be linked in the show notes. And we just want to say thank you for listening up to this far. And as we start closing down, I do have two questions. One of them, which, if you know the show, is going to be a wisdom bomb. So good to give you the heads up coming in there. I do wisdom bomb every day. And so that's just a short little message a portable truth that people can take with them. So I'm going to ask you both in a second. Give me a portable truth, a wisdom bomb that people can walk off the show with. But before I do that, I want to ask you, because we've gone on a journey today. We've talked about mental health. We talked about what you guys do. We talked about some successes. And so how do you guys specifically, and it don't matter which one of you guys start, how do you guys not quit? Like when frustrations get too high or you're just in that space, because everybody falls in that space sometimes. How do you not quit?
I'll go first if you don't mind. This may sound kind of morbid, but then I was going through my wallet yesterday because I was doing some stuff with my mother, and I wrote my own obituary. And I look at my obituary every day, and in it says Richard Kaufman, dies at 80 or 100, but he's a loving father. He's a loving husband. He's devoted. He's loyal to his friends and his family. He's a 5-time best-selling author. He's all these things. And so for me, when I want to quit, I pull out my obituary and say, well, if I quit, I'm not going to be that guy that I just wrote about. And I think, because I think once you find, that's why I love Dean Graziosi's book. I love when he talks about the 7 whys. When you find out what your why is, and if you know what your why is, then when things get tough, you're not going to quit because your why is stronger than your quit.
That's good.
For me, it's growing up. My parents used to say, "I'm done," right? They would say that all the time, and I didn't realize how much of that carried with me. But I've also now learned I'm done for now, right? It's a moment. So if something happens to you in a moment, that doesn't mean the rest of your life. You don't need to carry that on the rest of your life. So for now, when I say I'm done, yeah, I might be done. And I walk away, and about 10 minutes later, I get that burning desire. Same thing after my suicide attempt. I wanted to be a TEDx speaker. I wanted to be more. And I was like, God, what do I do? How are you going to lead me? Like, I am the lowest. Nobody should see me. I should dig a hole and all those things. And God basically said, all right, I'm going to plant you. Okay, when we plant you, it gets dark. You're gonna have to go through some dark. Are you brave enough to go through some of the darkness? I said, God, I'm with you, and that's really what it is how we see going forward. Are you okay if you stop doing what you do? Is there you've poured everything out in the universe? And I'm like, no. Even today, I'm still pouring because I think of something else. I get a message. I get a vision. I get something. It might not be God. It might just be me. I don't. I don't know. But the trust is what we do with it. And if you're okay with just stopping, then stop. But until you find that other mark, I talk about it, and I don't want to take up much more time. But the spark of the phoenix. That's what always got me back. Everybody believes the phoenix dies. It does not. It's in the Bible. It does not die. God has granted the phoenix ultimate life. Right? It was in the story of Adam and Eve as well as in Noah. But it doesn't die. It turns to ashes, and that's why we think it dies. And what reignites it is the spark of God. And that's one of the questions I ask when I talk to people. Do you believe you still have the spark of God? You might not feel it. You believe you have it. And if you believe you have it, that's what can always turn you up.
Sweet. All right. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and, as we land the plane, said wisdom bomb. So a portable truth. So let's go start with you, Richard. What is a wisdom bomb that you can leave for the audience?
Well, every year I have my own Today I Decide Mental Health Summit. This year it's going to be April 7th. It's going to be virtual. And the reason why I call it that is because the three most important words in the English language are today I decide. I decide, or we decide, if we're going to be a victor or a victim. Every morning we wake up, we get another chance to be a victim of our past or the victor of our present and our future. So, what are you guys, including talking about the audience too? What are you guys deciding to do today? Do you want to be the victim or the victor? It's your choice.
David?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, think about a butterfly. A butterfly is so powerful. A butterfly started as a caterpillar, turned into the butterfly. That's an ugly process. If you don't know what it is, they get into that cocoon. They become liquid. They turn into something, and then it becomes a butterfly. But the really trick about the butterfly also is it doesn't realize how beautiful its wings are, how powerful its wings are, and that's from everybody else seeing it because it doesn't care. It knows who it is, and when the storms get really tight, what does a butterfly do? It hides. It knows the power of where it needs to go back into itself. So just think about while you're going through the toughest parts of your life, think about a butterfly and know that you're a butterfly. If you're in what stage you're in, you could be flying, you could be in that metamorphosis stage when it's really gooey, or you could be a caterpillar, just walking along, figuring things out. All of those stages are powerful.
So with that being said, guys, how do we find you? Let's make sure the audience can connect with each one of you guys. So David, you go first. How do we find you?
All right, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. The great thing about the last name Chametzky, we ain't too many of us. So if you see a David Chametzky, it's going to be me. I think I might be the only David Chametzky in the world. But it's davidchametzky.com. Check out my podcast, Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. And it's all about bringing awesome thoughts and being authentic today.
Sweet. David, Richard?
Well, and I followed Gary Vaynerchuk's teachings, and you can always look for vertical momentum. We're on the first 12 pages of Google. So even if you just Google vertical momentum, we're on the first 12 pages. We're on 36 different platforms. So wherever you're at, we're at.
So that's awesome. So with that being said, to the listener, thank you so much for getting to this part of the episode. We appreciate you, David, Richard. We thank you so much for having an impromptu paddle. We started off with solo, but ended up as a panel. So I think I appreciate that. Thank you. And then, again, to the listener, all of this will be in the show notes because we're going to make it the easiest we can make it so you can find these guys. And I highly, highly, highly encourage you to connect with each one of them, hit them up on the socials, check their podcast out because they are powerhouses and your life will be different as you listen. And with that being said, you have been listening to Grace in the Grind, where we're here to equip, to empower, and to encourage you to do all that God has called you to. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you on a future episode.
This has been Grace in the Grind. Whether you're a Christian leader looking for guidance or an entrepreneur seeking inspiration, it's Jim's passion to equip and encourage you. Make sure to check out Jim's solo episodes, where he shares practical leadership insights grounded in a biblical perspective. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on social media at Lead with Jim. And you can also hit the website at www.leadwithjim.com. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time on Grace in the Grind.